We are here with Marc Matouc, who is the current graduate officer. What experience would you say that you have that sort of qualifies you for this role?
I had experience in my previous college, the Irish American University, or American College Dublin. I was the first student representative there during my year. No one else took up the role, and from there on in, I was also a class rep and a peer mentor. That meant that I was with basically 16 permanent staff and faculty over a college that I think there was roughly anywhere between 200 to 500 people who attended. So I was responsible for bringing up matters, whether that was welfare related, academia, or social life. I brought that up to the board, and I felt like because it was just me, that meant that I had to gather myself very quickly, and I did very well at that.
And what would you say is the most single important part of your job as graduate officer?
It's casework, 100%, and I think particularly in a post-pandemic university, I think it's feeding into the university spirit and how people feel. I think that there was a lot of social isolation after the pandemic and the lockdown, and that caused a lot of significant health issues in terms of mental health for people. So I think for me, it's about community building, above all, community building and casework, and feeding into that and being intuitive to a campus that, especially in Smurfit, might be considered more neglected than other parts of the university.
What would you identify as the three main issues that are really impacting students at the moment?
I certainly think the accommodation crisis is a given, the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, and then I think another serious issue would be general student atmosphere, and kind of school spirit. I think that's a big one as well. Those would be the three.
Yeah. And so what would be your plan to sort of increase the engagement, I guess, with students, but also with the student union?
That's a good question. It's a long-winded one,
Yeah.
but I think the main thing that comes to mind, again, I have to go back to the survey that I did, which is in my remit as a graduate officer, and it's in my capability to change. I think now that I've brought that to the directors in Smurfit, and that they've actually considered it, they've appreciated it, that it's the first time they've ever received student data before, I would like to piggyback off of that data, which asks various questions to do with transport, social amenities, and societies. And some of the main points that came out of that meeting was that we want to create a legacy. So with a lot of master's students in particular, they're only here for a year or two, but the input that they had on that data this year will now, I feel, will transcend in more of a legacy for future students to come in. So that's one huge thing that I want to build on. That could involve anything, whether that's to do with academia, whether that's to do with feedback from professors, whether it's to do with how people feel navigating the campus, or to do with, again, their general social atmosphere. So that's a huge thing for me. We asked a lot of specific questions related to that we got 409 responses for. I was very happy with that. Outside of that, I think representatively speaking, you're talking about 9,000 people who are in Belfield. They're the bulk of most postgraduates. There's only about 1,300 in Smurfit, but I think there's a lot of potential there because it's small, which means it's easier to change, I feel. On the big level of things, I always quote my Irish teacher in secondary school. He said, "Lads, you can hit a rock 3 times with a pillar and nothing will change, or you can keep chipping away. And I think as far as the 9,000 graduates that are here are concerned, I'd like to see more self-sufficient societies that and individual groups that I've worked with a little bit, especially in the psychology area of societies and things like that. So more representation here, more specific awareness that postgraduates are students too.
And do you think that the student union has been good, in matters of engagement?
I think certainly this year we've had a lot of ground to cover, and I think my team and I have made exceptional ground in many ways. I think last year, and I think the problem generally speaking with the student union, is that the agenda, with all due respect, can shift from politics to social life, and politics to social life, and I just feel like the standard, and I've said this before, but I feel like where we're at right now with the university is that most people who have come here right now graduated during a secondary school cycle that was met with COVID, where they were restricted. The people who graduated who had experience in prior years, who could have passed the torch on to new incoming students, they all graduated during the Zoom cycle, on the online cycle. So they couldn't pass on tradition, they couldn't pass on knowledge of the campus. That little, zeitgeist, if you will, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's lacking a little bit, well, certainly significantly actually in UCD. I feel like people are a little bit too shy, and I don't blame them. They've got a lot going on, and you know, between their academia, between the cost of living crisis. But I feel like if we're to make a proper atmospheric, strong campus, I feel like what's lacking is a bit more outreach, I would say. You know, just a bit more walking out spontaneously, just asking people how they are, what are you listening to on your earphones, etc., you know. I think that's the stuff that makes college exciting. I think when I think of a student coming in here, they shouldn't be thinking, I'm going to go from A to B, I'm going to go to my lecture and come back home. They should be thinking, what's going to happen next? And I think the most unexpected environments are often the most fruitful.
Yeah, so we mentioned Smurfit quite a bit. So much of your work has been around like Smurfit, but at the end of the day, it's a very like small portion of postgraduate students.
Yes.
Like, do you plan to extend more to like the Belfield campus?
Yeah, I think I do, for sure, absolutely, and that's why I'm running again, because I'm, again, coming in here. This is my first normal year, so much of my time here, although I was working with casework and I was working to try to do my best, it's been a learning curve and a comfortability cycle. And I think that's the case, and that's a huge challenge with the SU to begin with. You're taking a year of a sabbatical leave. By statistics, the average time that you feel comfortable with either your team or your environment is between 6 to 18 months. I'm now coming up to month 10, I believe. So far, that penny has dropped. I do feel comfortable now, but it was an experience that I needed to feel comfortable in. So, in terms of moving postgraduate attention onto Belfield, absolutely, I have a lot more awareness of the structures now.
So could you just remind me, what were the conclusions of this Smurfit survey?
Generally speaking, the conclusions were that 50% of people were completely dissatisfied with the transport, not only to the campus, but between Belfield and Smurfit as well. So they felt like there was a need for some sort of shuttle bus. That's essentially what the information is directing towards. 80% of people said that if there was a service, that they would be satisfied with that they would take it, which goes to show, even on a base level, in terms of connectivity, if transport was just bridging the gap between the reliance on a very unreliable 17 bus, you know, then that would just probably amp the standard a little bit, raise the bar even that much. Other than that, the main findings were that, social atmosphere wasn't there. People found that the place was like an office building, very dead, very quiet, and I have to agree with them. You know, there's no music in the hallways. Even if there are events, they're very much like spread out during the year. They don't muster a sense of like social inclusion, if that makes any sense. And a lot of people from all the various questions definitely want a gym. They want facilities. They want more recreational facilities and things like that. They want to be able to make friends and be treated like students, not like, you know, they've got to have some sort of pressure to force themselves to be whatever idea of an adult some people might have on them. So college is a time for people to explore. It's a time for people to find out who they are, and that's what we found through the survey. They do want that.
So how are you hoping to involve students? Because you mentioned that ever since we've been back from COVID, things have changed. So how are you trying to get them involved?
So there's been a few events that I've had, some of which, to my knowledge, have been for the first time. So there's been like the Shocked in the Gaeilge event we had in Smurfit. I'm planning on having another event with women in STEM coming up soon. There's a few things that I would like to see in place again, Smurfit is my main focus that I'm doing on, simply because it is purely master's students, and it's a great area to kind of take a test as to how postgraduates react to these type of things. I felt like if I do a more wider response to the Belfield postgraduates, so like 9,000 of them, I feel like it'll be harder to gauge a kind of controlled example as to how people will react. So when I talk about Smurfit, what I would like to see and what I'm planning on doing is bringing down things like a pool table that would be down by the service desk as well. So that just means that people can have a little social hub and things like that. So social hubs, seeing more regular events, and then just having people more involved in general union events as well. And that would be related back to the connectivity of transport and things like that, you know.
And what do you think makes the current bureaucracy of UCD sort of unsustainable in like actually helping students?
I feel like, again, you know, I feel like sometimes a year can be very personal to what somebody might want. And as great as that intention might be, I feel like there's been less of a, or at least as I've felt, there's been less of a 5-year plan, or like a 2-year plan or a 10-year plan. And I feel like that's what that bureaucracy does. It's the type of thing where people try and focus on making these massive changes, which is noble and certainly doable with the right circumstances. However, I don't necessarily feel that will be consistently realistic in like 10 years time. So like, for example, with any survey that I might do, and the Smurfit survey isn't the only one I have planned, that is data that I would like the future sabbatical team to look back on and be like, oh, so this was done, so we have evidence from students to suggest like this is how we should move forward, or this is what was lacking back then. Up until now, as far as I'm aware, there was none. So it's the type of thing that I feel that bureaucracy is there because people only focus on the short term. They don't focus on the long-term goals. And when you only focus on the short term, you become less sustainable. Now, again, there are absolutely some things we've done that have been 100% long-term. But in talking about the previous year, I don't necessarily think that it was all considered long-term.
Yeah, and how do you feel like your personal experience as a student has informed your understanding of college affairs?
COVID, absolutely. Like COVID, the pandemic, the lockdowns, whether you were fine with it or not, the masking and things like that, feeling like you couldn't see someone face to face. I came in with all of that when all of that occurred. It was my first experience here. And I felt like a lot of people who are now currently students or who are coming into it also had that experience, rather than people who started 5 years ago who didn't start out with that experience. They don't know. Maybe I feel like they're a little bit out of touch as to what that's like. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's no icebreaker. There was no icebreaker. I didn't have any peer mentors at the time, and I tried to make that something for postgraduates at the time. Mm-hmm. Again, it's something I'm learning about, but I feel like that's my biggest strength. So that I was an outsider coming into a place at a weird time.
And why do you feel the need to run again? What do you think is left unfinished that you want to really finish before you go?
Good question again. I've become addicted. I really love, especially when it comes to behind the scenes items, like student queries and things like that. I must have answered 100 plus now. And it's just of people trying to navigate in Dublin, whether it's welfare, academia again, or social life. They're coming to me and they're asking me for my knowledge. And I personally feel like I've had a decent amount of lived experience to know who to contact, who to refer to. If they want to have a meeting with me, they can talk to me. And the best part of that is seeing somebody who is very happy after they've gone through a lot of desperation to try and find a resolvement to their issue. And that's what I love. It's like an endorphin shock for me. But yeah, casework is really important. But also, personally coming into here, in my own personal experience, I always wanted to come to a big university like UCD. And coming in here when it was, when that school spirit has been diminished, that's a personal thing for me. It's not just business, Yeah. I want to see that rectified. And in turn, whether I go back to my master's or not, I want that work to come to fruition and help me and my fellow students. So, do
you think that your goals and ambitions have changed from one year to the next?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. I feel like I've just become more informed as to what I should say and what I shouldn't say. But also, just understanding the structures of my own staff and my team, which are fantastic. But I didn't know that beforehand. I didn't know what was capable. I didn't know that a certain process has to be taken care of this way and another one has to be taken care of in another way. It's also the literal familiarization of the campus. When I joined, I didn't know what the Tierney building was. And then as I went to my board meetings, I found out, oh, okay, this is here, this is here, this is here. So I think if anything's changed, it's just been my knowledge of what's available to me and how I can access that rather than my ideals.
The UCDSU's motto is to empower students. How do you feel like you've done that, and how are you hoping to continue to do so?
I think empowering students is definitely a constructive process, if you will. And what I mean by that is that it's not something that happens overnight. It's the type of thing where you need to generate support, and how you generate support is showing that you care, that you're there for them 24/7 when you're on your job. Like, so for me, how did I empower students? Again, I have to refer back to the queries online, the meetings I've had. Representation was a huge thing as well. So like the likes of the PWO, seeing that formulate from two groups, the PCAU and the PGWA, and amalgamating into one group, that's extremely important. That's history right there. You know what I mean? Now we have the PWO, Postgraduate Workers Organization. So it's not only about working on a individual basis with students, it's about translating those problems into national things, and kind of seeing a full circle of that. So that's how I feel like the best way we've empowered students.
As a graduate officer, you need to sort of be in charge of like everything that concerns graduate life. So that's like diversity and inclusion, things like welfare, education, even things relating to, like, for example, sexual violence and stuff like that. So like, how do you think that you're going to prepare for that, and what will you do?
I think it is, as great as a role as it is something where you're taking care for technically 12,000 students. You're the first point of contact for anything, whether that's a PhD student who could be 50 years old, or whether that's a master's student or a grad dip student that could be 21. So the varying of that demographic is huge. It can be challenging, absolutely, especially when the other roles tend to focus on undergraduates, and they can share that workload. Now, I share my workload with other team members, of course, but how I would like to see that change is perhaps reviewing the Constitution again and introducing a postgraduate part-time officer, or seeing more intermediary postgraduate orientated officers or people like that. There's also a national PGSC. It's called the PGSC. It's a national mapping of postgraduate constituencies that's being done by the EUA. I'm really banking on that to work, because that will show us exactly where we can engage with postgraduates, and I feel like that data is not updated. So that's what I would like to see: more data, more people, in respect to GDPR, of course, like more data that would give me something to work with, and I don't think that that's fully developed yet.
You mentioned that postgraduate students often feel underrepresented. Would you work with groups like the PWO?
100%, and I currently do, and I think they're fantastic. I think there's a lot of stigma around becoming a part of something like that, and I think to be outspoken, especially if you're an international student who isn't necessarily as familiar with the legalities of joining things like that, and maybe feels a level of intimidation. I feel like that group and the people organizing it have been outstanding in their effort as to introduce people into that, and whether that's as well in collaboration with the PhD Society to some degree, in terms of having a proper transition where students can know it's okay to protest, it's okay to want better rights for your studies, for stuff that you've not only are paying for, but you deserve better stipends for. So yeah, 100% all the way with PWO.
And how are you planning on synthesizing like undergraduate life and postgraduate life? Because I think that a lot of postgraduate students, there's the whole age gap thing and experience. So how are you hoping to bridge that gap?
I certainly think there's something to be said for the topic of ageism, if you will. And I don't know if that's talked about enough in the general college ether, if you will. I feel like there is a level of stigma that comes to if you're 24 coming into college, if you're 25, if you're 41, that's certainly the first basis that I would like to work with, like anti-ageist mentality. The idea that we went through 2 years of again, it goes back to the pandemic again, but like we went through 2 years of the pandemic, which I feel like stole from our experience. And I feel like based upon the people that I've met, a lot of people want to make up for that time. So I would start off with combating that idea of like you have to be an adult now, and you have to be, of course we all have to be adults, we have to take accountability, pay our taxes, etc., all that sort of stuff, but like there's a distinction between being a student who responsibly transitions to an adult and being somebody who needs to explore. There's so much you can do with that. There's so many different events you can have, there's many different seminars you can have, whatever it might be. I'll have to figure it out for my next campaign. I don't know exactly the answer to that part, but I damn will try and find it out.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you,
Great.
Tessa.